Do you have any idea who I am? I donated $4 million to this building. I'll have your badge pulled before your shift ends. That's your right. But you're still not coming through this hallway. She wasn't supposed to be alive. That's what the men in the black SUV assumed as they drove past the hospital that morning. They were wrong. And so was the billionaire who was about to make the worst decision of his life. The ICU never slept. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms. The air smelled like antiseptic and quiet desperation. Nurses moved fast and said little, because on this floor a wasted second was a stolen life. Sarah Bennett had worked this floor for 6 years. At 31, she was the one the younger nurses called when a vein collapsed, when a family broke down in the hallway, when a patient coded at 3 a.m. and nobody else knew what to do. She was the calm that held everything together. She was also 7 months pregnant. Her feet ached. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, grinding pain that started around hour 4 of every 12-hour shift. But she never mentioned it. She just rubbed her belly once between rooms, took a slow breath, and kept moving. None of her coworkers knew much about her life outside the hospital. She never talked about where she grew up. She never mentioned family. When people asked, she smiled and changed the subject. Nobody knew, and nobody was supposed to know, that the quiet nurse adjusting in 4-line in room 6 was the foster sister of Marcus Cole. Except that wasn't the name people used for him. On the street, he was known as Wolf. And Wolf didn't work in hospitals. He didn't attend charity galas or show up on Forbes lists. He moved through the city like a current beneath still water, invisible until the moment he decided to destroy something. He was the most feared man in the Pacific Northwest underworld. His organization had no official name. His face was in no police database. He'd kept that entire world away from Sarah for years, not out of shame, but because she'd asked him to. Let me be normal, she'd told him once, back when they were teenagers. Let me just be a person. He'd honored that. Always. But peace, it turns out, has enemies. The double doors at the end of the hallway slammed open at 2:14 p.m. Every head on the floor turned. The man walking through them wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most nurses made in 3 months. His name was Derek Whitfield, 44 years old, founder of 3 tech companies, a man who had never once heard the word "no" without consequences. Behind him, a nervous assistant pressed a folded cloth to Derek's left palm. A small cut, the kind you'd get from a broken glass at a restaurant. The kind that needed a band-aid, not an ICU. Derek didn't know that. Or more accurately, Derek didn't care. He scanned the unit like he owned it, which in his mind he practically did. His last donation had funded the hospital's new cardiac wing, and he had the framed thank you letter from the board to prove it. I need a doctor. Now. His voice cut over the sound of the monitors. Not a resident. Not a student. A real one. A young doctor named Tyler hurried toward him, hands raised, voice low, trying to explain. This floor is critical care, sir. Your assistant's injury is minor. The main ER is 2 floors down. Derek grabbed Tyler's coat and shoved him sideways. The whole floor stopped breathing. Derek pushed forward, heading toward a room where a 67-year-old man was recovering from open-heart surgery, his eyes scanning for an empty bed, a nurse he could order around, anyone who would just do what he said. Sarah stepped out of room 6. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. Derek stopped walking. His jaw tightened. He looked at her the way powerful men sometimes look at people they've already decided don't matter, like she was furniture that had mysteriously started talking. Do you know who I am? His voice dropped into something uglier. I donated $4 million to this building. I will have your badge pulled before your shift ends. That's your right, Sarah said. She didn't move. But you're still not coming through this hallway. Something shifted in his face. The controlled anger cracked, and something colder came through. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather card holder, flipping it open and holding it toward the young doctor still pressed against the wall. "Write me a number," Derek said. "Whatever it takes to move one of these patients to another floor. I don't care which one. I need this bed." Tyler's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sarah spoke instead. "Put that away." Her voice didn't shake once. "Money doesn't change which patients are stable enough to be moved. The man in room 4 had open-heart surgery 11 hours ago. He cannot be relocated for a hand cut." Derek turned to her slowly, the card holder still open. "You're a nurse," he said, and the way he said it made it sound like an insult. "You don't make those calls on this floor." "I do." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Derek launched into it, loud, ugly, relentless. He called her incompetent. He said her scrubs looked like they'd come from a thrift store. He brought up her education, her salary, her place. He said things that made the younger nurses at the station stare at the floor in shame. Sarah absorbed every word without flinching. She turned toward the wall phone to call security. That was when Derek hit her. The sound of it was wrong, too sharp for a hospital, too loud. It cut through the quiet of the ICU like something breaking that wasn't supposed to break. His palm connected with the side of her face, full force. Her head snapped sideways. The clipboard in her hand hit the floor. She stumbled back, one shoulder catching the edge of the nursing station counter, and her hands flew instinctively to her belly, both of them wrapping around the curve of it, protecting it. She didn't fall, but her eyes closed for a second, and that second said everything. The floor went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that follows something irreversible. A young nurse named Ava stood frozen at her station, both hands pressed to her mouth. The security guard by the elevator had his hand on his radio but hadn't moved. Nobody had moved. It was like the oxygen had been sucked out of the building. Derek straightened his jacket cuffs. "Maybe now you understand how this works," he said. Down the hallway near the exit stairwell, a tall man in a black coat stood with his hands in his pockets. He hadn't moved since the doors opened. He'd watched the entire thing, the shoving, the threats, the slap, the way Sarah's hands went to her stomach. There was a small tattoo on the left side of his neck, wolf's eye, half open, staring forward. He didn't pull out a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He took out his phone, typed 4 words, sent them, and walked out the side door. Dar. Whitaker arrived 60 seconds later. He was the chief of medicine, 62 years old, silver hair, a reputation for staying calm in catastrophic situations. He walked in, surveyed the scene, Sarah still steadying herself against the counter, Derek standing with his arms crossed, and made his decision in under 3 seconds. He chose wrong. "Mr. Whitfield." Dr. Whitaker moved toward Derek with his hand extended, his voice smooth. "I am so sorry for this. Let's get you taken care of immediately." Sarah stared at him. He didn't look at her. Not once. Derek rolled his shoulders. "Your nurse was aggressive and obstructed patient care. I defended myself." Dr. Whitaker nodded like he was hearing a routine weather report. He didn't check the cameras. He didn't ask the witnesses. He didn't look at the red mark spreading across the face of the pregnant woman 10 feet away. He turned to Sarah, and his voice went flat. "I'm going to have to let you go. Effective immediately. Please surrender your badge and clear out your locker." The shock hit her somewhere behind the sternum, not from the words. She'd half expected the words the moment Whitaker walked through the door and didn't check on her first. It was the witnesses, the nurses, the doctors, the security guards who had just watched Derek Whitfield slap a pregnant woman in the face and were now staring at their shoes. 2 security guards walked her out, not roughly, but firmly, like they'd been ordered to make it look official. She handed over her badge, emptied her locker into a paper bag, and walked down the long main corridor, past the patients she'd cared for, past the break room where she'd eaten hundreds of lunches, past the room where she'd once held a dying man's hand because no family had come. The front doors opened. Cold air hit her face. It was raining. She stood on the wet sidewalk and pulled out her phone. There was already an email from a law firm. Derek Whitfield was suing her for emotional distress and professional interference. She read it twice. Then she started walking. The next morning, her card was declined at the grocery store. Her accounts were frozen. Derek's legal team had moved fast. When she got home, an eviction notice was taped to her door. She sat in the dark apartment, put both hands on her stomach, and breathed slowly until the shaking stopped. She'd left her old life because she wanted something clean, something earned, something that was only hers. She'd built it over 6 years, shift by shift, patient by patient. Now it was gone in a single afternoon. She sat with that for a long time. Then she stood up, went to her bedroom closet, moved a stack of boxes, and found the fireproof case behind them. Inside was a phone she charged once a year, just in case. Just in case had arrived. She dialed a number she'd memorized a decade ago. Marcus answered on the first ring. He already knew, he'd been in that hallway. He'd seen the slap happen in real time, watched her hands go to her stomach, watched the chief of medicine choose a donor over his best nurse. He'd walked out that side door not because he didn't care, but because Sarah had made him promise years ago that he would never act unless she asked. He'd spent the last 22 hours waiting. When her voice came through the phone, quiet and broken at the edges, he closed his eyes. "I need help," she said. That was all. "You don't have to say anything else," Marcus said. His voice was the calmest it had ever been. "Go to sleep. I'll handle it." He set the phone down on the glass table in his penthouse office, looked out at the city lights below, and made 4 calls. By morning, Derek Whitfield's problems had already begun. Derek found out over dinner. He was at his private club, Blackwood, leather chairs, the kind of place with no prices on the menu. He'd ordered 2 bottles of something obscenely expensive to celebrate the fact that a pregnant nurse had been escorted out of the building where he was supposed to be apologized to. When he placed his card on the tray, the waiter came back 2 minutes later with the look of someone who wished he worked literally anywhere else. Declined. Derek snatched the card and called his banker. 6 missed calls were already waiting on his phone. His company's stock had dropped 19% in the last 3 hours. His offshore accounts, 3 of them, in jurisdictions chosen specifically for their privacy, were empty. Not withdrawn. Empty, like the money had never been there. Then his head of security got a text message. Derek watched the man read it, watched the color drain from his face, watched him put the phone in his pocket, stand up, and walk out of the club without saying a single word. Derek sat alone at a table with 2 untouched bottles of wine and no way to pay for them. He spent the night trying to hire people to fix it. He had names. Dangerous ones, men who had made inconvenient situations disappear for important people. He met the first one in a parking garage at midnight, slid a bag of emergency cash across the hood of a car, and showed him what he'd found in his mailbox when he got home, a black envelope sealed in dark red wax, stamped with the image of a wolf's eye. The man looked at the envelope for a long moment, pushed the money back, got in his car, and left. The second fixer didn't even sit down. He saw the seal and shook his head before Derek finished a sentence. The third, a man with a badly broken nose and a reputation for taking cases nobody else touched, looked at the seal, looked at Derek, and said quietly, "You hit someone you shouldn't have touched. There's nobody in this city who'll take this job." Not for any amount of money. Why? Derek demanded. The man looked at him with something between pity and revulsion. Because whoever sent that envelope doesn't negotiate. He just collects. Derek drove to his private airfield at 2 a.m. He had a jet. He had cash. He had a plan: get out of the country, get somewhere without extradition, rebuild from there. He was 50 feet from the steps when the headlights hit him. 3 black SUVs appeared from the dark edges of the tarmac like they'd been parked there for hours, which they had. 6 men stepped out. No weapons visible, no raised voices. They simply took his arms, put a bag over his head, and drove. When they removed the bag, Derek was kneeling on a cold marble floor. The room was enormous and almost entirely dark, except for a light at the far end of a long table. Sitting there with a cup of tea and an expression of complete calm was the man from the hospital hallway. The wolf's eye tattoo was clearly visible on his neck. Marcus set down his cup and looked at Derek Whitfield the way someone looks at a problem they've already solved. Derek's instincts defaulted to aggression. It was the only tool he'd ever really had. "I have connections at the federal level," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Marcus slid a tablet across the table. It stopped directly in front of Derek's knees. On the screen was the ICU security footage, full resolution, time-stamped. It showed everything: the shove, the screaming, the slap, Sarah's hands going to her stomach, the guards walking her out, Dr. Whitaker nodding along like he was hearing good news. Derek stared at it. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. "Then, you thought she was alone?" His voice was quiet enough that Derek had to strain to hear it. "You thought nobody was coming?" He leaned forward slightly. "She has me." A lawyer stepped out of the shadows with a stack of documents. Marcus laid out the terms without emotion. Every asset. The company, the properties, the vehicles, the patents, the emergency cash already burning in a barrel in the corner, transferred immediately. Every penny would go into a legal trust for underprivileged single mothers in the city. The donation was structured so it could never be reversed. The gym bag of cash Derek had brought to the airfield had already been collected. Derek sobbed through the signing. Real tears. The kind that come not from guilt, but from watching power leave your hands forever. When it was done, the men put the bag back over his head. They drove for 20 minutes. When they pushed him out of the vehicle, he hit wet pavement and rolled twice before stopping. He tore the bag off his head and looked up, hospital emergency entrance signs. The same building. He was in the parking lot where Sarah had stood in the rain, holding a paper bag of her belongings, freshly fired from the only job she'd ever loved. Derek Whitfield sat in the rain with nothing but the clothes on his back. And then the police cars came, because while he'd been sleeping in alleys that week, Marcus had sent his financial fraud records to 3 separate federal agencies. Tax evasion, embezzlement, wire fraud. 10 years of it, documented perfectly, delivered anonymously. The officers stepped out. Derek didn't run. There was nowhere to go. Morning sun poured through the large windows of a private suite on the 7th floor. The room was warm and quiet, flowers on the windowsill, soft light, the sound of a newborn breathing. Sarah held her daughter against her chest and looked out at the city. Her daughter had her grandmother's nose, a full head of dark hair, and lungs that had already announced her arrival to the entire floor. She was perfect. Marcus stood near the door with his hands folded, looking at his niece with an expression Sarah had never seen on his face before, something open, unguarded, human. He'd bought this hospital 4 months earlier, quietly, through 3 shell companies. The board hadn't known who owned it until the paperwork was finalized. Then they knew. Dr. Whitaker had quietly resigned, which turned out not to matter, since the new ownership had already begun processing his termination. Whitaker was currently employed 2 floors below, not as a doctor. The janitorial team had been short-staffed. As Sarah watched her daughter sleep, she heard the squeak of a mop bucket in the hallway. She glanced up through the open door and could see him, older-looking than she remembered, moving slowly, eyes down. He passed the doorway, looked in, saw her, looked away immediately, and kept walking. She didn't call after him. She didn't need to. She looked back at her daughter's face. Marcus crossed the room and stood beside the bed. He looked at the baby for a long moment, then at Sarah. "You good?" he asked. She laughed, a small, real, tired laugh. "Yeah," she said. "I'm good." He nodded once, like that settled something he'd been holding on to for a while. Downstairs, in a federal holding facility across town, Derek Whitfield sat in an orange jumpsuit on a metal bench. The wealth was gone. The legal team was gone. The investors, the board, the club members who had once laughed with him over champagne, all gone. He had spent 44 years building a life where "no" was a word other people said, never him. He had just learned what happens when you're wrong about that. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead and breathed in the warmth of her. The storm was over, not because the powerful man had fallen, though he had, completely. Not because the coward doctor was mopping floors, though he was. It was over because she was here, in this room, with her daughter breathing softly in her arms and her brother standing quietly at the door, and the world outside had no claim on her anymore. She had fought for a normal life her whole life. She hadn't realized that sometimes the people who love you fight for it too. The quietest people in the room are never the weakest. They're just the ones who haven't decided to move yet.